This video is sponsored by War Thunder. This is the Greater Mississippi River Basin, the largest inland transport route in the world. Nowhere else are there so many rivers whose source is not in high land, where the river runs smoothly across vast distances from farmers and factories to the ocean and the markets that lie beyond. This basin helped the US become a continental power. It sustains over 1 million square miles of fertile farmland and provides drinking water to over 20 million people. But lately, we've been hearing a lot of this.
The water level of the Mississippi River is at an all-time low.
The Mississippi River is at historically low levels, contaminate the drinking water supply.
1 month, we're hearing about how the river is drying, contaminating drinking water, and is heavily polluted. And then the other month, it's flooding again, and water levels are too high. But here's the real problem. In man's quest to control these mighty rivers, it's been transformed from a dynamic, natural system into an over-engineered canal, and that system is crumbling. This is why the Mississippi River is dying. With Hindsight. This vast basin was acquired by the US with the Louisiana Purchase. The French had already been building dams and levees for over a century, and the US decided to follow in that tradition. They put the newly created Army Corps of Engineers to the task. The main priority in those early years was to improve navigation of the river system and to promote commerce. But the river soon showed to be both a blessing and a curse. The Mississippi originates from a small glacial lake in northern Minnesota and flows all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. Along its way, thousands of lakes, creeks, and streams feed into the river. This vastness is also what makes the water levels of the Mississippi very susceptible to weather patterns elsewhere on the continent. For example, heavy rainfall in the upper Ohio Basin can lead to high water levels in the Delta, or a drought in the lower Mississippi Valley can lower it. The floods in the 19th century made this devastatingly clear, but the real turning point came in 1927. Did you know that War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and you can play it today for free? War Thunder has over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters and ships of 10 major nations, including biplanes and armored cars from the 1920s and the fighter jets and battle tanks of today. What I personally love is just the incredible attention to detail. Each vehicle is intricately modeled down to its individual components. If it gets hit, these components respond just like they would in real life, and it's put together with authentic sound design. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation or Xbox by using my link in the pinned comment or in the video description. New and returning players that haven't played in 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across all platforms that includes multiple premium vehicles and much more. This is available only for a limited time, so be quick. The summer of the previous year was exceptionally wet. It kept raining and raining for months on end. And around Christmas, in some areas, the water level was raised by a remarkable 56 feet or 17 meters. Shortly thereafter, all along the Mississippi, the levees started to break in 145 places in total. More than 27,000 square miles or 70,000 square kilometers of land came underwater in 10 different states, but Arkansas was by far hit the hardest, with 14% of its territory now covered by floodwater. The flood lasted several months and inundated some areas with 30 feet or 9 meters of water. It was by far the most destructive flood in the nation's history. The United States realized that this was not an exceptional event. The geography of the Mississippi expects the river to occasionally spread across its floodplains, but this natural dynamic is bad for business, and it's a disaster for the countless emerging communities on the river's bank. The damages of this flood were a third of that year's entire Federal Reserve budget. This had to be prevented in the future. This terrible flood of 1927 kickstarted the first comprehensive plan from the United States government to develop the river's basin. The Mississippi River and Tributaries Project started, which is now considered to be amongst the most successful civil works projects that was ever initiated by Congress. They built the longest system of levees and floodways in the entire world. The first levees, built by the French, were only 3 feet or 90 centimeters high. But by the 1980s, the United States had raised them to an average height of 24 feet or 7.3 meters. In the upper Mississippi, a series of locks and dams were built to guarantee a 9 feet or 2.7 meter depth for commercial barges. In the lower Mississippi, the water is already much deeper and can be accessed by cargo and even cruise ships. Between 1927 and 2015, nearly $14.8 billion was invested in this project, and it received an estimated $639 billion return on that investment. This amounts to a 45-to-1 return for every dollar invested. Despite several major floods, the system of levees proved to be incredibly durable. The frequency of flooding has declined, and the transportation is now much more efficient. But there is also a flip side to this success. For thousands of years, the Mississippi River proved to be fertile habitat for millions of birds and fishes. But it only took a few decades of damming and channeling to turn this into a giant barge canal, now relatively devoid of life. The natural floodplain ecosystems were drained and cut off from the river. Today, the river is still home to 25% of all fish species in North America, and 60% of birds in all of North America migrate along its flyway. Fishing, tourism, and recreation generate over $21 billion in revenue each year. Only a fraction of the natural treasure remains, and it's worth protecting for both environmental and economic reasons. This stat will shock you. The river's basin accounts for an impressive 92% of all agricultural exports in the United States. This region is the top producer for corn, grain, and soy, and most of this is shipped over this water. This river system was essential to the nation's growth throughout the Industrial Revolution, and it still is. Farmers in Iowa harvest their soybeans. They put them on barges to be transported to the port of New Orleans, from where they're mostly exported to China. It also works reverse. Some chemicals are processed in Louisiana and are sent upstream to factories in Pittsburgh. This river system is a superhighway, and it's many times cheaper than land export. A typical group of 15 barges lashed together carries as much cargo as 1,000 trucks. All effort that humans put in controlling this river's flow is without a doubt an engineering marvel and an economic success. But it also had adverse effects on the environment and is without a question an ongoing challenge. Let's assess the main issues today. Pollution. A river is the sum of all that it gathers on its course. The greater Mississippi River Basin is amongst the most productive farmland in the world. Farmers use chemical fertilizers, which have nitrogen and phosphorus. These nutrients are essential to growing soybeans and corn, but are often unintentionally lost to the river. Here, they become a pollutant and a waste of the farmer's money. About 40% of the Mississippi watershed is polluted, and swimming and fishing are not advisable. These pollutants ultimately end up in the Gulf of Mexico and lead to a rapid overgrowth of algae. When this algae dies, it decomposes, and that process consumes oxygen. This process has created an area about the size of Connecticut that's completely devoid of oxygen. This is a dead zone. This part of the ocean is so low in oxygen that no wildlife can survive. It is estimated that this is costing the US seafood and tourism industries about $82 million per year. flooding, and drought. Despite all efforts, the river can still not be fully controlled. In the summer of 2023, a huge snowpack in northern Minnesota and Wisconsin quickly melted. This rapidly raised water levels, causing flooding in several communities in Iowa and Illinois. Only a few months later, the situation was in reverse. Louisiana and Mississippi had their hottest August on record. By September, more than a third of the contiguous United States was experiencing drought. And in October, the lower Mississippi water levels dropped to a historic low. Barge companies reduced the weight of shipments because the river simply wasn't deep enough. The cost of shipments had risen to 77% above average.
This boat is dredging, scraping mud off the bottom here to get barges moving through again at some point. I should be underwater.
Some barges got stuck on the sandbanks, resulting in even further delays. The weather still greatly influences the flow of these rivers, but in the Delta region, these effects are even more amplified. Saltwater intrusion. In the 1980s, the channel was deepened from 35 feet or 11 meters to 45 feet or 14 meters, and this causes some issues. The Mississippi riverbed sits below sea level. Anytime the flow drops below a certain volume, saltwater enters from the mouth of the river and travels upstream. When the river was deepened, this problem was aggravated. The following year, the 1988 to 1990 North American drought had begun. This was the worst drought in the United States for well over a century. The saltwater intruded more than 100 miles, or 160 kilometers, up the river, making all of this water salty. This water is intended for land irrigation and for drinking water. The corrosive saltwater damages pipes and distribution systems. This was a nightmare for the region. But yet, in 2022, the river was further deepened to 50 feet or 15 meters. Why would they deepen this river if it leads to all of this? Well, there's another side to this story as well. A higher river bottom would raise the top of the river during flood stages, of which 5 already occurred in the past 7 years. A deeper river also improves the access to the port of New Orleans, which is amongst the busiest and the most important in the nation. A deeper river has both huge benefits as it has downsides. So, in conclusion, what's being done? There exists an array of challenges on the Mississippi and its tributaries. The dynamic natural system is no more, at least not as it was a few centuries ago. About 80% of the natural floodplains are now farmland and villages. In 2019, several dams broke in Atchison County, Missouri, flooding 166 homes and submerging 56,000 acres of land. That community is now restoring some of the original floodplains to make room for the river. And this is something we're seeing across the entire watersheds. There are efforts to restore the natural dynamic of the river. This is also good for wildlife preservation, and it mitigates the risk of flooding. It's a different mindset of living with the river instead of fighting against it that seems to dominate the efforts that are made today. One of the efforts to reduce pollution is to motivate the use of cover crops. These are crops that are not meant for harvest, but are meant to manage the quality of the soil. They improve the land's ability to hold water and reduce the amount of nutrient runoff. To combat the negative effects of saltwater intrusion in the river's delta, New Orleans is planning to construct a pipeline to pull in water from further upriver. This would dramatically improve their access to fresh water in the event of saltwater intruding. The Mississippi River, as it's been for thousands of years, is dying. It's being turned into something that it's not, a stable and reliable channel. But you can't subdue its nature. The river wants to flood. It wants to dry. It will continue to respond to changing weather patterns, and these are expected to become more extreme. But now tens of millions of people live on its shores, and they can either have the river as a servant or a friend. Again, thank you for War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to play it for free on PC, PlayStation or Xbox by using my link in the pinned comment or video description. It's available only for a limited time, so make sure not to miss it.